this is Rick Levine with a Cosmic Quickie. I'm here today to talk with you about Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, Democrat from California, and she has a very interesting story astrologically that we're going to tell here very briefly. First of all, Nancy Pelosi was born on March 26th, 1940. We do not have a time for her. She was born in Baltimore. Her dad was the mayor of Baltimore, actually. But we do not have an accurate time for her. That means we don't have any houses, but that doesn't stop us from getting real meaning out of her chart. We know that on March 26, 1940, we know that the sun was at 5, almost 6 degrees of Aries. The moon travels about 12 degrees a day. That means that the moon in her chart is somewhere between 10 degrees of Scorpio and 22 degrees of Scorpio, in that range. So we're not using aspects to the moon, but we know that she's an Aries Sun and a Scorpio Moon. So we know that Mars is going to be important in her chart, and we'll come back to Mars in just a moment. The other thing that's of interest in her chart is that she was born with a nearly exact Saturn square Pluto. Now, all of us astrologers know that we're coming up to a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January of 2020. Well, when Saturn conjoins, squares, or opposes Pluto, the energy is a mixture between Pluto's relentless evolutionary transformation, meltdown, the process of degeneration, regeneration, and Saturn as a container in some ways gives Pluto a form within which it can do its transformation. Pluto-Saturn conjunctions, squares, and oppositions are not easy. They can be very difficult. They can be relentless. They can be powerful. And we see in Nancy Pelosi's chart her Saturn at 0 degrees and 44 minutes of Taurus, square Pluto at 0 degrees Leo and 40 minutes. That's just 4 minutes of arc from being exact. And in some ways, this makes Nancy Pelosi amongst the oldest of the Pluto in Leo generation, because she was born with Pluto having just moved into Leo. And that Saturn square Pluto is very, very significant about the reputation that she has. She is not someone to be messed with. She gets her way. She's powerful. But what's interesting is this. Number one, that because Uranus is now moving back and forth between Aries and Taurus, it's now retrograded back into Aries, will be moving back into Taurus again, that over the past year, Nancy Pelosi has had transiting Uranus conjuncting her natal Saturn and squaring her natal Pluto, activating this powerhouse of that Saturn-Pluto square. This is a very important piece of what's going on in her life right now as she takes the mantle in Congress, at least in the House of Representatives, and makes a position to fight, if you will, the fight against Donald Trump. Now, here's where it really gets interesting, because Nancy Pelosi's daughter, Alexandra Pelosi, is a commentator on CNN. And she was recently asked, so how's your mom going to fare against Donald Trump? And she responded very interestingly. She said, she'll cut off your head so fast you won't even know you're bleeding.
Just what are your feelings about this person who you know quite well becoming Speaker of the House for a second time?
She'll cut your head off and you won't even know you're bleeding. That's all you need to know about her. No one ever won betting against Nancy Pelosi.
And now we get to the rest of the story. Because Nancy Pelosi's Mars, although conjunct Uranus and Venus in Taurus, her Mars is at 25 degrees 58 minutes of Taurus. So 25 degrees, late 25 degrees of Taurus. Doesn't matter what time of day she was born, Mars is at 25 degrees of Taurus. Algol, the fixed star, is at 25 degrees. These days it is at 25 degrees 26 minutes of Taurus. So Nancy Pelosi's Mars is by degree partile conjunct the fixed star Algol, which is considered to be perhaps the most treacherous, most dangerous, the worst perhaps star in the sky, according to the ancient traditions. Ptolemy in the 2nd century AD called Algol the star that represented death by decapitation. She'll cut your head off so fast you won't even know you're bleeding. Death by decapitation. Interesting. You see, Algol actually represents the archetype of Medusa. Algol is the beheaded Medusa in the constellation of Perseus. Now, the story is that Medusa, who was actually beautiful and quite vain, was lured into one of Athena's Athena's temple by Poseidon. That would be the Greek version of Neptune. So Neptune basically raped Medusa, but Athena was so pissed off because her temple was trashed. It was not a good scene. And Athena took revenge on Medusa and turned her into someone so ugly with live snakes as hair that it would be frightful, and anyone who would look at her would turn to stone. Now, Perseus is considered to be a hero because he actually slayed Medusa, and Algol is the beheaded Medusa, is the head of Medusa in the sign, in the constellation of Perseus. But if you haven't figured this out already, there's a bit of patriarchal bias here, because although historically Algol is considered to be the demon star, in fact the word ogre and ghoul come from the same word, the same root word of Algol, and in Hebrew folklore Algol was called Rosh HaSatan, which is the head of Satan. So it does not have a good story behind it. But in modern astrology, it's interesting because Algol doesn't have quite the same bad reputation that it once did. It's considered to be passion and intensity, and it's the passion and intensity that is related to the feminine archetype, which can be used effectively or destructively, constructively or destructively. And so it's very interesting that we have a woman who is an Aries Sun with the moon in Scorpio, Aries and Scorpio being the two domiciles of Mars, and her Mars the warrior planet, is conjunct the beheaded Medusa, as if she's here to reframe this patriarchal myth, just another patriarchal myth. It turns out that Nancy Pelosi with her Mars conjunct Algol actually may be someone who can help to reset the story and tell it in perhaps a more gender neutral, if you will, environment. I'm Rick Levine here with another Cosmic Quickie. For those of you who are patron subscribers, thank you very much for supporting this and Cosmic Quickies like this. For those of you who are not, you can go to Patreon. That's www.patreon, P-A-T-R-E-O-N, patreon.com/Rick Levine, and find out more about this and other video offerings that I have available. Think cosmically and act locally.